Ja, und ich höre gerade, wir können
Well,
anfangen.
I just heard that we can start now. Dear audience, I would like to welcome you very warmly in this format of exchange here in the space of the convention of the Demography Days. It, of course, deals with many problematic topics and has had an exchange on these over the past hours. The idea of the organizers was to end on a positive note, if possible. Let's see whether this is possible. I'm Shelly Kupferberg, free journalist, moderator, and author, and am very much looking forward to talk to the internationally known author Maja Lunde from Norway, and to hopefully also with your comments and questions do this.
Again, actually, we met 1 year ago in Leipzig at the book fair, and we had a beautiful conversation on your books, and we'll repeat some of the aspects and points. Welcome. Hi, how are you?
Hi, thank you. It's nice to be here. Hello from Oslo.
Wir schicken Grüße nach Oslo zurück und liebe
We're
Teilnehmer.
sending back greetings to Oslo. And dear participants, it will be like this. I, of course, will give you a few milestones on Maja Lunde's work and biography. We'll then have an exchange about some central aspects of her writing and doing, her commitment, we have to say. And let me point out that Maja Lunde, as you just heard, will speak in English. I will speak in German, but we have great interpreters on board to whom I would like to extend my warmest thanks for their wonderful work. Very welcome. And if you want to use this feature, then in the bottom bar, you see this little globe you may click. It says Dolmetschen, respectively interpreting, and there you will find the respective language, English or German, and then you can listen there. Apart from that, if you have any questions or comments, and you can have it right from the outset if you like, or also during our conversation, please lodge them under F&A/Q&A at any time. Write them into the chat. I've got an eye on the chat, and I will certainly pick up on these questions whenever pertinent. And if relevant, you may as well write from what institution or on behalf of what institution you're attending. This is also of interest for me. So this is what I wanted to say on the rules of the game. We all know them. Also, as a result of the pandemic, we are well trained in doing that, and we're pleased to have this chance of communicating to each other this way. Maja Lunde was born in 1975.
Biography and your literature. Jahrgang 75 in Oslo.
So born in 75 in Oslo, and this is also where she's living today with her family. She just said she is also in Oslo now, and she's also out and about a lot. She's a well-known script and author of children and youth books. The History of Bees is her first novel, which both nationally and internationally caused a lot of response. And then the so-called Climate Quartet was followed. The History of Bees as the first part. Then there was Blow, then the Przewalski's Hest, and then the final of the Climate Quartet was titled The Dream of a Tree. Maja Lunde's books are award-winning and have been translated into many, many languages. The idea of inviting her is a wonderful one, as I think, because indeed it is true that she has looked a lot into crisis and crisis modes and has addressed environmental questions and matters we all have on our minds a lot in this context and cause a headache for us. How she addresses that in terms of literature and research, this is what I want to discuss with her. How and why, dear Maja, is it that you originally started writing about climate matters?
Write about climate issues. That was the question, right? Yes.
Why and how?
Yes, I actually wrote about climate issues and nature already when I was maybe 15, 16 years. When I've been engaged in these issues ever since I was a kid, we talked a lot about the nature crisis, especially around the dinner table, my mother and I. And this has just been something I always been engaged in. But then it took me quite long to realize I wanted to write novels. I was a screenwriter for some years. I wrote a few scripts, and then while writing, I also started to write for children books. And the way from writing for children was quite short to writing the way I used to when I was young. And I searched for a long time to find the theme, to find the story that I wanted to engage in, that I wanted to sort of marry. Because when you write a novel, you really have to, you have to love the story,
And the
or
figures.
else, yeah, it will just bore you. And then one day I saw a documentary about colony collapse disorder and about the importance of pollinating insects on the planet and the importance for us. And in that story, I sort of saw all the material for the novel, for the history of bees. I just had my idea. So that was why I started to write that novel. And I think writing about, climate, the nature crisis, I would say that the history of bees is more a book about nature than it is about the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is not the main theme of that novel. It is maybe more of the second novel, actually. But to write about that felt like, coming home, finding the material that really mattered to me, that felt like it burned. In Norway, we say write where it burns, and this has always been where it burns for me.
This is true, it burns, ja. Auf dieser Tagung haben Sie viel über Krisen.
And during this convention, there was a lot of talk about crises. And the idea today also was, to talk about a happy end, not to leave this convention or a conference totally depressed. But this is certainly not totally easy. And this is why I want to ask you, Maja Lunde, how you deal as a literature figure with this matter. Some of your books are very dystopic. Others also give us a ray of hope. What is it like for you as a writer, particularly as a fiction writer, to deal with this question? How much happy end is possible at all? And how close do you want to stay to reality? But also, to what extent do you want to instill hope in us readers?
Sorry, I don't speak German, so I think maybe I can...
sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you have the interpreter maybe
I
within
can
your
try.
ear.
Yeah, I can try it. No, it's...
Sorry,
I don't
sorry.
actually.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just talking about the fact of happy ends. And to what term would you say? I mean, it's a question for someone who writes novels, if to write a dystopia or how to deal with maybe a happy end. And as all the participants were talking about the climate crisis, world crisis we just face within this time, how do you deal with the issue of giving your readers a happy end or not, or some hope at least?
Well, this might sound strange, but when I write, I don't really think too much about the readers. I don't think about the message. I try to be true to the story, to be true to the characters, and to be on the inside of the story, to feel that it is alive. And it's the only way I know how to write. So I guess the endings are they are one example of me trying to be true to the story, and also trying to be true to myself. I would say that I'm optimistic every second day and pessimistic every second day, but I try to always keep some hope. I think we are obliged to our children to have hope, especially when the world is starting to look like a gloomy place. So I think that feeling is reflected in my endings. I want to have hope. I clinch to the hope. and therefore all my stories always have this sort of, it's I wouldn't call it, they are not light endings, but they give you something at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not definitely happy ends. I will continue in
No,
English.
but at
and,
least open ends endings. Yes.
It's true. Your climate quartet has found so many readers worldwide. Did you know from the beginning on that, or what kind of stories you would tell in those 4 very different books?
As I told you, I knew when I saw that documentary, I knew I had the vision of the whole story. I knew what kind of characters I wanted to write about. I knew what the main theme would be. So I had the very, that book was the first draft of, which is sort of a 1-pager or maybe 2 pages, is extremely similar to how the book ended up being. And I wrote that book sort of in a rush, and I didn't tell anyone, and everything was sort of strange and new because it was my first novel for adults. And while writing, in the beginning, I thought it would be a standalone, but while writing, all these other stories kept popping up into my mind. Some of them were images, one of an elderly woman standing by a waterfall being really angry and being really attached to this waterfall in Norway today. And that was all I knew about her. Another image was of a young man walking alone in a drought-ridden, very dry landscape in southern Europe in close future. And then he finds a boat, and that was all I knew about him. And these 2 stories found their way into the second novel. And then I got the summer of 2015, before I even had published The History of Bees, I saw these horses in France, in southern France, and I realized, and I got their story, which was the Przewalski horse. And I realized this would have to be the third novel. And then from the very beginning, again, I had these images from Spitsbergen. And I knew I wanted to have a 4th book from Spitsbergen, and to sort of to connect my material in a story and a 4th story. So while I was writing The History of Bees, this big jigsaw puzzle with a lot of pieces that fit together sort of built up in my mind, and I knew it had to be 4 books, and I had sort of quite a clear idea of what they all would be about as well.
I will just tell a few words about the 4 books in German. Just a conclusion maybe of all those 4. Ja, das sind sehr umfassende Geschichten in diesen 4 Büchern. Und Maja
Well,
Lunde
these stories in these 4 books are very comprehensive, and Maja Lunde had already hinted at which aspects are important to her. These books also have plots in different ages, in the past, in the future, in the present. It's about the destruction of species, it's about drought, it's about the flora, the diversity of plants, and in the last part, it's about a small community in the north. Maja Lunde just said the setting is Spitsbergen, and we will
in a second in Spitzbergen. Da geht es eine Gemeinschaft, die den Kontakt zum Rest der Welt
Spitsbergen.
hat und einen Schatz hütet und so weiter.
This is about a community that watches over a treasure. It has a chamber where the seeds of plants of the earth are held. The whole thing plays in the year 2110, and I would like to ask you, Maja, what made you have this idea?
In the year 2110, what exactly gave you this idea?
Well, this is 12 years after the future story in The History of Bees. The History of Bees is set in 2098, and this is 2110. So yeah, 12 years after. I knew I wanted to bring Tao from The History of Bees back to the story, and I knew I wanted to meet her again a couple of years after what happens to her in The History of Bees. So that is one of the reasons why I wanted to be that far away from us in time. Also, I knew, as I said, I knew I wanted to write about Spitsbergen. In the beginning, I was drawn to Spitsbergen because it is it's a place where you really see the climate changes. The temperature has risen with 6 degrees. The medium temperature has risen with 6 degrees in Spitsbergen the last couple of years. And so the melting of ice goes so fast. And you can see it almost. I've been there several times doing research for the book, and I've seen the glaciers literally melt in front of my eyes. Every time I've been there, they have been smaller. But then when I first visited, to my very first research trip for this book was actually in 2017, so it's a long time ago. And then I had heard about the seed vault before I arrived, but I hadn't really reflected that much upon the value of the seed vault. And quite soon I realized my fourth book wouldn't be about ice and glacier and water. Actually, I wrote about that already in the second novel. So this would be the last novel would be about seed and plants and everything that grows and everything that gives us food. And in Spitsbergen, there are no trees. They only have this vault inside of a mountain. You find seeds, food seeds from all over the world. And this is such a strong image, I think, with these very hard landscape with no trees. The plants are only, this small. Nothing can grow. It's almost at the North Pole. And still you find millions and millions of seed in the mountains, and every single seed can become a forest or a large crop. One seed can actually change the world. So that was also something. I mean, the metaphoric, level was just. It was just so. I found it to be great, so I had to use it. And the third reason is, so you have Tao. I want to get back to her, and I have the seed, and then I wanted to describe a world. Post-apocalyptic world, which is actually not the one you always find in films and other stories. It's not actually a bad place to live. This small society, they have cut contact with the rest of the world, and they try to live green, ecological. They try to do what is right. And to only use what they need, to not exploit nature. And they have had this small community, 500 people maybe, for some years. And then a disaster happens, which changes everything. So that's sort of where the story starts.
Yeah, very strong images, actually. The world as we know is no longer exist as it is. Many countries no longer exist. There's no infrastructure in the places where people live within the book, no material for health, for instance, and care systems. Many people die of diseases. What does the world look like in these years in your imagination, or let's say in the book? And on what kind of base did you write and research?
Well, as I said, it's a rough society, but it's also a place where people take care of each other and try to live, hand in hand with nature. So it's not all only gloomy. Well, research. Yes, I went to Spitsbergen, of course. I get to know the place really well. I try to build my society on the society they already have there. And I well, I talked to a lot of experts, as I always do. I read a lot, saw a lot of documentaries. So I just, spent time on Spitsbergen and tried to get it under my skin, so to speak.
Yes,
It's a very special place. It's really, you feel like you're at the end of the world,
which
when
can be good and sometimes maybe a bit spooky. I don't know.
Yes, yes. And that is also, you feel really small. I haven't felt that small. Maybe also in Mongolia when I went to the research for the third novel, because it has some of the same, feeling. It's just no trees, just you're alone in this enormous landscape, and you can, because there are no trees, you can just see until the end of the horizon. And Spitsbergen made me feel even smaller because it's such a rough landscape. You have the nature is, yeah, I would say quite dangerous. You have avalanches, you have polar bears. You can't go outside the small village without being armed. So you live very close to death. And this is also something I describe in my book.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as I told you, something terrible happens that changes everything. And just 5 people are left alone in Spitsbergen. And the book actually starts when one boy, one young boy, he's all alone. And he is, so this was also something for me. It was I can't think of anything more lonely than to be left alone on Spitsbergen. So that's where we start. And this is a book that goes back and forth in time, and I sort of slowly reveal what has happened and why he's alone and what happened to the seed, because the seed vault is sort of a treasure in the novel.
We won't spoil in this
No, I
moment
won't
what's
spoil
going
it.
to happen or what happened. But you always connect your stories and the big questions concerning our environment with individual family stories. Why did you choose this form of storytelling?
Well, this is also something that just, it just happens. There are a lot of not very deliberate choices I make when I write. I find family, communication within families, especially the relationship between parents and children, extremely interesting. I think when you're in a relationship with a partner, it can be sort of the same for years and years. It doesn't really develop. But with your children, since they are developing all the time, you also have to develop somehow, or at least try to. And we all know how hard it can be to have children, or if we have children, at least we know, and all of us know that it can be quite hard to have parents too. And also in this close relationship, you invest so much, and that makes them, there are a lot of stake in close relationships, a lot at stake. So I think that is also one of the reasons why I write. I mean, you could call the quartet a relationship quartet as well. I mean, you have this label, the climate quartet, but I would definitely say it's even more maybe about relationships. Since all my books have been about parents and children, actually I wanted the last book to be about children, orphan children, or children alone.
Yeah.
And about children, especially Tommy, the main character, children who have to take too much responsibility.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He's that kid. He has always taken care of his brothers. He's done. He has just had too big a burden through his entire life. His mother died when he was very young, so it's also a story I have maybe even a small homage to all those kids out there who carries too heavy burdens and to do much more than they should, when they should be allowed just to be kids, and they have to do things that grown-ups should do and take responsibilities that adults should take instead.
That's a very important question. Maja, we have some questions from the audience. I'm very happy to read them for you. For instance, there is Paula Konsersmann, and she wants to know from the Katholische Nachrichtenagentur. This is a Catholic news agency. I will read the question. The current Pope, she's writing, is sometimes labeled as green and repeatedly calls for the preservation of creation. How important are such prominent statements for the climate movement? What would you say?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat it, please?
Yes,
I don't have it written here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can read the question, I think, in the
Here
Q&A.
it is. Yeah, yeah.
So it's about the current Pope, a question about how important such kind of role models are, because he is labeled as green Pope and repeatedly calls for the preservation of creation. How important are such prominent statements for the climate movement? That's the question.
I mean, when people that like him, that so many listen to, say, give these messages, it do really matters. So I would say it's of huge importance. And I wish more leaders, I wish more, everyone that knows that people look up to them would use their voice and say these things as well, because this is what changes the world.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. There's another question about literature, which is really interesting. Someone wants to know, sometimes engaging with catastrophes in academic research is calming somehow. I'm wondering if the same applies here. Can crisis literature help make the unknown less unknown and therefore less scary?
I'm not sure. What my readers tell me is that they find the books to be scary. But I do think literature can show us the future in another way than scientific reports or journalism can do. And films as well, I would say. I mean, fiction has another role. Through fiction, we are actually another person, and we can live in that future, and we can relate to it. And when we have read novel, it somehow gets part of us, and it lives within us. And therefore, it will also change, and can change at least, the way you look at the world a little bit. But I'm not sure if it makes us feel safer. I would rather say, at least when I think of other novels that do somehow the same things as I do, they scare me and also motivate me to actually try to do something and act.
As you are a bestseller author in many, many countries, Maja, how do people react towards your literature? Do you have the feeling that they are less scared, maybe, or even motivated as you are, telling such stories, reading such stories, thinking about human being and the way they behave towards our environment?
Do you mean if there are differences between countries?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reactions. How do people react towards your literature if you talk to your readers?
Well,
Are they scared or maybe less scared through your literature?
What I quite often hear is that the books open their eyes. like when reading the history of bees, they suddenly start to see all the insects in their garden, and they want to take care of them, or they feel grateful for having a glass of water after reading the history of water. And I also have especially young readers who tell me that the books made them start to involve and to try to do something. So, and also I have a lot of readers who read the books because of the relationship stories and because they find them to be page turners, and manage to sort of put them away after reading. So it all depends. I think that these reactions are quite similar actually all over the world. I haven't really felt any, cultural differences in how the books are read, which is also quite interesting. I think I find it somehow comforting that people have the same kind of readings all over the world.
True. Yeah. There's a question from a researcher and writer based in the US who's writing: ecology, demographics, human and the animal world, climate are all interrelated. How can we optimize this interrelationship without revolutionary changes in our lifestyles and dietary changes in society driven by disinformation and political divisions?
That's
This
a
is
very
a
hard.
big question, but thank you,
Yeah,
whoever wrote it.
I would say the answer is 42, but we don't know the question. No, yeah, it's such a large question, but I think the answer is we have to change. And especially in rich countries, we have to start to think differently about what a good life is. And we do know a lot about what people, Homo sapiens, need to be happy. We need close relationships. We need someone to love. We need to be safe. We need nature. Nature makes us happy. A new cell phone doesn't really make us happy. So the belief that growth and that getting richer and getting more, things will make us happy is, we have built the modern society on that belief, but it's just wrong, and it's not really what we need, and that is something we should talk much more about, I think. And also we have to limit. As someone said before, we can't grow into heaven. We only have this planet, as you know. Limits for growth.
Yeah. There's one basic question you mention within your literature. You ask this very big question within your books: how did humans become a species that changed everything?
Yes.
What is your answer to that?
Well, I would say that when I had finished the last book, the fourth book, I was actually for the first time able at looking at the project and trying to see what I have done and what I had tried to do. And what I had tried to do was I had tried to search for hope. It's 2,000 pages long search for hope. And I investigated more and more, especially in the last two books. I had a few main questions going through my mind all the time that I investigated. And the first was, how come we ended up changing this world? How come the man, Homo sapiens? And do we have it to make up for our mistakes? Do we actually have the abilities needed, or are we by nature, by our own nature, doomed? I don't have the answer. I'm a novelist. So that's my privilege, sort of, not to, I can raise questions, but I don't have the answers.
Yeah.
But I do find hope in some of our abilities. We are so good at changing. We can change so fast. Look at how much happened during the pandemic, for example. The rebuilding after World War II. And we are extremely good at cooperating when we want to. And we have this large empathy, not only for our own species, but for other species as well. And therefore, I would say the book about the third novel, the book about the horses, Przewalski's horse, that is a story that really gives me hope. It builds on a true story about how these horses were almost extinct in the wild, and through only 13 individuals, a few really passionate people managed to raise the race again and reintroduce them to their land of origin, Mongolia. And today there are a couple of thousand horses in the world, and they all come from these 13. And this is something we can do. Only Homo sapiens is able at doing something like this, and we do it because we have this huge empathy. I mean, if we all decided to save another species, I think we would also save the world. So this is something that gives me hope. What we can, if we want to, and if we start to not see ourselves as the center of this planet, but to see ourselves as part of nature, and to look at all the other species that live here as individuals that deserve to be here as well, and try to really appreciate nature. For me, the key is somewhere in there. And the hope, and especially the hope. I find
hope.
that to be hopeful. Yes.
Yeah. Maja, let's talk about your last book, which will come out in Germany next year, as far as I know. Lukkertid is the title.
Shutter Speed is the English title.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in this book, that was published in Norway last year, you deal with the topic of demographic change. That's another dystopia you wrote. Demographic change is also a big issue, not only in Germany and some other European countries, but also in the Scandinavian countries. What exactly were the questions that occupied you?
Well, I'm not sure I would say demographic change is the main theme of the novel. It's a more playful novel than the others. And the shutter speed is what happens in a camera when you take a picture. At least old fashioned, it's when the light come in. It's the very, very short moment when the light come in. And what happens in my novel is actually that the time stops. So the human being stops to develop. We're sort of thrown out of time while nature keeps going. So nature develops. Nature, animals get children, trees get the plants grow, but we are just standing still. Children can't grow, people don't die, and sick people don't get any sicker. And people are, in the beginning, this seems like a gift because you have all the time in the world. But after a while, it gets the situation gets quite desperate. So that's the setup, and it's a lot. We meet several people through a couple of months as the desperation rise. And I should probably not spoil that much more.
Will it be a standalone or?
It's a standalone, yeah. And it's sort of speculative fiction, I would say. It's actually an idea I had. I got the idea in 2015 when the History of Bees was published in Norway, and I had just turned 40, and And I had realized for the first time in my life that this wouldn't last forever. So this book is actually about death, and it's sort of my way of trying to embrace death and trying to, play a bit with death and look at what happens if life doesn't end, and realize that that might even be more terrible than having an end to it all. So, but
Probably,
it's definitely a book about parents and children. The main character has 2 children. She is dying in the beginning. She has cancer. And it's also a novel about the relationship between man and nature. Because one of the main characters, he's an elderly man, and he's really fond of his garden, and his wife have forced him to move into an apartment, which he hates. And I used a lot of me in that story as well, because I'm very fond of gardening, so I didn't have to do any research at all. But yes, it's definitely a novel about man and nature, but in a completely different and more playful way, I would say, than the
yeah.
others. Yes, it's definitely also a standalone this time.
But that brings me to the question, what is the attraction for you of telling stories between science fiction and reality? Because there is a lot of reality within such a story, but at the same time, it's kind of science fiction and dystopia or whatsoever. It's your fantasy.
Well, it's always about the story, and I have several ideas that are more, realistic. I think the next novel I'm planning to write is realistic, sort of comedy drama. You say that in German, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a closed room story about a relationship between a daughter and a father. So that is something, different again. With the books I have already written, the Climate Quartet, the story needed this, it to go on both in the future and in the past and in the present, because I wanted to explore how the world can look if we don't stop the nature and climate crisis, and to find out I had to go into the future. But I don't really call them science fiction. For me, they are relationship stories and stories about man and nature, but part of them are placed in the future. When it comes to shutter speed, my latest novel, that is definitely something I would label speculative fiction, because it's sort of a what if scenario. Yeah. But I think I have so many ideas for new stories.
That's what I just figured out. Incredible. Where do you take all those stories from? Just a second, I just wanted to say, the audience, if you have some more questions, please feel free to write them into the chat, because we have maybe 10 minutes. And so maybe you want to use this time for your questions. But anyway, you just here and there mentioned what gave you one or the other idea, but you seem to be a lot of ideas. So where do you take them from?
They just pop up, I would say. I don't know. I think I'm really open to new ideas. I think it's about realizing you have an idea. I can get an idea for a full story from just seeing something. Like when I visited Germany this autumn, I went to Munich. I had one afternoon. I walked around in a large garden surrounding a castle, and that setting gave me a new idea for a completely new story. And I had the beginning, the middle, and the end from just walking around there. So I think it's something about seeing the idea. I think a lot of us have ideas, but I'm quite good at catching it. Oh, there's an idea. oh wow, how can I explore it? How can I elaborate it? And then suddenly I have an idea for a book.
Yeah.
Mm.
Maybe in the end, let's talk about the issue of being optimistic or not. Is an optimistic attitude naive or urgently needed? What would you say?
As I said earlier, I think we're obliged to be optimistic.
Yeah.
It's urgently needed. If we lose our hope, we also lose the urge to do something, because then we just give up, and then we just think it doesn't matter anyway. So I can just try. I shouldn't do anything. And sometimes I quote the historian and polar explorer Robert Swan. And he said that this the largest beast threat to the world is the belief that someone else will save it. And for me, that's very true. I think we're all responsible somehow, and we should all look at ourselves and our own position and see, what can I do? How can I be part of the solution, not part of the problem? And how can I try to change things in my neighborhood or in my village or in my company, um, or even just in my garden? Some of us can change things in our, on larger scale as well. And if we all try to do that, we would change. But it takes a lot of us, to try to do something.
Yeah.
Mm.
You're not only a writer for adults, as you said, you were starting with children's stories. What makes for you the difference, actually, writing for adults or for children?
I would say that more and more I think of also the children books as all ages, and I know they have a lot of readers adult readers as well, and they buy them for their own reading, not only to read them out loud to children. For me, it's about the position of the main character. I usually write first person, not always, but with my children books are always first person. And when I see the world through the eyes of a child, um, it usually ends up being a children's story. So it's mostly about that, or a story that that the shops will put in the children department. But I always try to have several levels, to have the level where it's like in my latest book for children, The Windmaker. It's about children and war. It will be published in German later. And the main character is a boy who is sent out of the city after war, and he comes to this beautiful island in the ocean, and he starts to explore mystery. And the children that read the book, they are mostly interested and driven by the mystery. What are these paintings that are hidden in the attic? What happened to the lady that he has to live with? Why is she so rude? And so they try to explore the mystery, while the adult readers, they see that this is a boy, he's traumatized by the war. He has a huge trauma that he's trying not to think about. And the adults will see that this is also a story that about him trying to deal with what happened to him and finally trying to speak with someone about it. And so I always try to have these different, you can see something as a child, but as an adult you will probably see more, and you will see and also maybe that can open up for a conversation between the child and the parent about the deeper and the more serious level of the book.
There's a final question from the audience. I will read it. You said that relationships are important in your readers, for your readers. What do you think is the importance of interpersonal relationships in seeking climate justice?
Oh, I'm not sure if I quite understand that question. I mean, the importance of interpersonal relationship in seeking climate. Can you maybe, Shelly, elaborate?
Well, I'm not so sure what is. I'm wondering what this means exactly. Maybe the person can sharpen the question a bit in the chat. There's another question in the meanwhile from Christian Oelschlegel from the University of Bielefeld. It's a city in Germany. It is helpful to not make predictions about the future, but to look back from an imagined future to understand what needs to change today. Can literature aid in this creative process? That's the question. Do you have it, Maja? Can you read it maybe?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Maybe it's easier than to follow, actually.
Yeah. Well, if literature can aid in the process of looking back, probably. Yes, I would say. For me, it's always been important to it always felt natural to go back in time, but also to go into the future. And when I write about the past, I write about how things started and trying to understand why we started to think the way we do, and where, like with the history of bees, for example, the story from the past. It's a story about the beginning of modern beekeeping, and to look at what runs through the main character, William. He wants to revolutionize beekeeping, and he wants to revolutionize the way we. He's actually part of the start of the modern agriculture, and to look at this also from an emotional perspective, as literature can do. At least for me, it made me realize him better, or made me understand better how people might have been thinking back then, when they started what we are now seeing give us so much issues. I mean, modern agriculture. I don't know if that made sense, but
Thank you. I think yes. And as you're not a scientist, you don't have to answer or not. I mean, those are your associations and ideas for that kind of questions. Thank you so much, Maja, for being with us, answering all those aspects, and share your thoughts with us about really important literature. I think you really encourage people taking responsibility for environment, for human mankind, for the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the nice words, Shelly. And thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.
Ja, liebe Teilnehmende, vielen, vielen Dank, dass Sie dabei waren und sich das angehört haben,
Dear
partizipiert haben.
audience, thank you for asking your question. Thank you for listening, for watching. And I think it's really inspiring to have this different perspective from literature on all these subjects, which are so important for us. And I would like to thank the conference organizers that they made it happen. I wish everyone good health, good nerves, warm welcome, and thank you for your interest and your attention. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, Maja.